It is now a good tradition that sinners have to face their past and their problems in each canto. And it goes without saying that it is a highly traumatic experience that changes them one way or another, so it was natural to expect the same for Don. Not only she had to face her past, deal with it and have someone dear to her die in her arms, that's already bad enough, but because she initially didn't have her memories, she wasn't even aware that it was about to happen. Unlike some of the other sinners, she had no time to mentally prepare and just got hit with it full force. So, after Canto VII, I was very interested to see how much Dawn would change in her demeanor and actions. And, in the next intervallo, the very first line she says is, "Worry thee not! How befitting of a hero it is to perish in place of her compatriot." And my question immediately was, what the hell is this? Was there no growth at all? Is this little blonde gremlin not cured of her heroic fixer affliction? Granted, Intervallo is cheating a bit there because we get a glimpse into it before going back in time to show some discussions that happened prior, and there are some awkward conversations around Dawn there, but my point still stands. Not counting the whole "let's take off her shoes for science" fiasco, Dawn has been acting pretty much the same, including being the one drawing too much attention in Canto VIII. And, while I didn't expect a full 180 character change from her, I kinda expected for her to at least somewhat snap out of her delusions. Of course, I realize that the whole resolution of the Canto's conflict, aptly called the dream ending, is that the dreams do not have to end. You can live a life of adventure. You can follow the dream, that is true. Still, when Don Quixote's memories returned, it pretty much broke down her whole identity. In a blink of an eye she got slapped with the actual reality of her life, and she had to realize how silly her antics were while she was riding the bus. We got her back, yes, but dramatic realization like that does not simply go away. So, why is there no real effect on how she behaves? When facing questions like this, I feel it is good to try and compare the themes of Canto to the original novel. Of course, the stories we get in Limbus Company don't have to be exact retelling of the original works. It would have been boring if there were that and just that, but it's still interesting to see how the story is adapted. Now, I am not any sort of specialist in literary analysis, but when talking about Don Quixote, I feel there are broadly speaking two levels of adaptation. One is surface level recognition. Don Quixote is not an easy book to read, so a lot of people haven't, but the basic premise is familiar to many. People know about a silly knight in a silly helmet fighting windmills like a silly person. Rocinante is a well-known name, as is of course Sancho Panza. These superficial details are in the Canto, of course. Fight with giants is compared to fighting windmills, and also the Ferris wheel looks similar to a windmill. Don Quixote, both of them actually, are idealistic knight types doing silly things. A weird hat is present. Rocinante is there, inseparable from its owner. However, those who have read the book would know the story structure and how little of it lines up with Canto VII. And I guess this is as good time as any to briefly go over the events of the novel. Don Quixote is a two-part novel in which the titular character sets out on an adventure thrice. The first part contains his first two outings, and the second one is dedicated entirely to his last ride. The first ride is what most people think of when talking about Don Quixote. He acts completely crazy, imagining everything as not what it is. Windmills he imagines as giants, taverns as castles, tavern owners as lords, and flocks of sheep as battling knights. And he acts very rash and violent, randomly attacking people, delusionally believing himself to be fighting rival knights and villains. And he gets his ass kicked quite a few times during all that. This story seems to exist purely for you to laugh at the silly antics of someone thinking he is not who he actually is. Of course, any reader can clearly see that if Don Quixote continues like that, it won't really be sustainable. He would simply get killed at some point. So, during his second outing, he acts slightly more reserved, and the story has him spending a lot of time at some remote mountain location. Meanwhile, Other familiar characters, the priest and the barber, follow him and meet a lot of interesting personalities along the way. And it culminates in all those side characters' plot lines converging to an agreeable and entertaining resolution witnessed by Don Quixote. Also, there's, for some reason, a reading of a novel within a novel about a guy who was too curious to test his wife's faithfulness and ask his best friend to try and seduce her, and that impertinent curiosity brought about nothing but trouble for everyone involved. Not counting that side novel thing, the second adventure of Don Quixote was reasonably good, but now it was clear that the titular character doesn't actually get to do much. And that's not even the worst of it. With all the side characters having wild and interesting stories, not only Don Quixote has less interesting adventures, in my opinion, that whole adventure felt like Don Quixote was oblivious to a lot of amazing things happening for real all around him. It felt like he misses out on life, which is more amazing than any fiction, while being stuck in his own head. That honestly felt like something the priest or the barber would want for the moral of the story to be. I have no idea if Cervantes also saw it as a problem, but proceedings once again changed completely during the third adventure. For the big part of it, Don Quixote is hosted by the unnamed Duke and Duchess, who see in his madness an opportunity for great amusement. And so, they play tricks on him and make the servants act in a whimsical manner, reinforcing Don Quixote's belief in magic, vengeful giants, and pure love-struck maidens. All things that do not actually exist, as everyone well knows. Duke and Duchess spared no expense in their games, but they weren't the only ones. During his third outing, Don Quixote generally met with people who either took him at face value as a noble traveling knight, or were eager to play along, which allowed him to, well, have his own adventures, which is the point after all. During the events of the third adventure is where we also meet Sancho, university student who decides to assist the priest and the barber in bringing Don Quixote back home. He also decided to play into Don Quixote's delusions and disguise himself as a rival knight, the Knight of the Mirrors. What he didn't expect is that Don Quixote, being an old guy on an extremely tired horse, would defeat him, which is what happened. After that, Sancho, fueled by embarrassment of his first loss, tried again, this time successfully. He presented himself as the Knight of the Moon, and his condition after his victory was for Don Quixote to return home and not do any adventuring for a long time. Which is what killed the guy. He went home, stayed there, slipped into melancholy, and died. Now, this is a very bare-bones retelling, and I haven't gotten into much detail, like Dulcinea's role in the story or the events surrounding the helmet. But this brief retelling should be enough to understand that events do not line up with the Canto VII at all. I guess one part that is somewhat similar in both stories is Don Quixote's first adventure and fight with windmills. In Canto VII it is represented by Don Quixote going to war and fighting giant bloodfiends there. In a way, both adventures are each respective Don Quixote's first real foray into the world, where they get metaphorically knighted and confirm the course of what they want to be doing, be it adventuring or further helping humans. Even that is reversed though, because in the original book, the first adventure was when Don Quixote was the most delusional. Meanwhile, in Canto VII, joining the war was a strange decision for a bloodfiend, but at the same time it was made with a reasonably clear mind. Also, I have just realized how confusing things will get because we have not even 2 but 3 Don Quixotes to talk about. We got the original Don Quixote, we got Don Quixote of La Manchaland, and we got LCB Don Quixote, Sancho, or simply R. Don. I will try to remember to name them correctly, but mostly I hope it will be clear enough whom I refer to from the context alone. Anyways, after the war, Don Quixote of La Manchaland did the most delusional thing ever. He created a theme park, staffed completely by bloodfiends eating nothing but hemobars, opened it up for regular humans to visit, and then expected it all to not go horribly wrong. And that shows the core of La Manchaland Don Quixote's delusion. He expects everyone to see the world like he does. So how could he expect his kindred to want to drink human blood? I mean, he was rid of that compulsion already. Bloodfiends are a very interesting distortion which seem to function the same way as normal vampires do in other media. There are many types of vampires in books and movies, but they always follow a set of rules. The key rule is blood. Vampires must drink it to survive, and they create new vampires using their own blood. Another big one is that they burn in the sun, and oftentimes older vampires are considered to be stronger than the ones they make, so their power goes down with each generation. There are many rules and they can vary. Fear of garlic and crosses, vulnerability to silver and wooden stakes, ability to control lower generations of vampires, bats or even people, inability to cross water or come into the house uninvited, and so on. Returning to the Bloodfiends of the city, they also have some important rules. They need human blood to survive, they have a strict hierarchy of kin, and they are deathly afraid of water. However, I will argue that, unlike normal vampires, Bloodfiend rules are not defined physically, but rather are psychological compulsions. And I believe those compulsions can be overcome. While Sancho did not remember that she is a Bloodfiend, she survived ages without human blood, and she suffered no discomfort from traveling by boat. But even without the memory loss, it holds. Don Quixote of La Manchaland never seemed to suffer from lack of human blood. Same for Sancho. Well, she will receive supplementary blood packs from the company now that she remembers who she is, but I think she would be fine even without them. Well, she keeps Rocinante on, of course. So, what's so different about them? Well, I believe they have managed to replace their compulsion with something else. Don Quixote of La Manchaland was a Bloodfiend who pursued his interests with burning passion. And we know that despite her protests and criticisms, Sancho also got into the whole fixer's obsession. So much so that both of them became more interested in helping humans / cosplaying as fixers than in drinking blood. Actually, I am pretty sure that many Bloodfiends are prone to fixating on specific interests, as we see in La Manchaland. The barber is obsessed with costumes, the priest has gone way too deep into confessions, and Dulcinea gets her kicks out of being the figurehead of the parade. Their obsessions are not quite strong enough to offset their hunger for blood, but at the same time, I am sure that they don't feel the need as much as lower-ranking kindred without hobbies. Okay, Bloodfiend tangent is over. Back to Don Quixote. He maintained that everything is just great until he was forcefully corrected by his kindred using the helm of Mambrino. After that, he became suddenly aware of the pain he was causing, and when he was given the option to feed his children, he took it, though not without some reservations. This, I believe, matches the end of the original novel, where Don Quixote is forced to return and be the lord of his village again, which drove him to melancholy and death. In the same way, Don Quixote of La Manchaland is forced to act like a proper Bloodfiend should, but it is bringing him suffering at the same time. In that regard, Sanson did ruin everything for both Don Quixotes, though again, very much not like in the books. In the books he acted like a knight of the mirrors and the moon, eventually defeating Don Quixote and making him return home to live in peace. That was a surprisingly smart trap, because Sanson knew that Don Quixote, believing himself to be a noble knight, would have to comply and uphold his promise. And at the same time, upholding that promise and not being able to go out and adventure like a noble knight was what slowly killed him. In Limbus, the Knight of the Moon is Barry, not Sanson. Sanson appears hundreds of years after Don Quixote is locked with his suffering children, and he provides the means to unseal the amusement park. And once again, that is a trap that plays on the same traits of Don Quixote. He doesn't want his kindred to attack humans, but at the same time it is his duty to provide for his suffering children. It is not a moral dilemma while the park is sealed, but with Sanson bringing the golden bough, it's a decision Don Quixote must make. Regrettable but inevitable. That is a sad fall of a noble Bloodfiend who strived to help humans and ended up not having any choice but to betray his own ideals. Enlightening but not entirely satisfactory on its own. And that is because Don Quixote of La Manchaland is not the central character in this story, so he is not the one carrying the main message. Thank God, and I don't believe I'm saying this, we have another, deeply confused and delusional character to save the day. Yes, I am talking about Sancho, our very own Limbus company boss Don Quixote. In the original work, Sancho is a character that constantly follows Don Quixote in his adventures, and Sancho is one character that mostly believes Don Quixote's claims. Not all of them, and sometimes Sancho is also shrewd enough to use his master's delusions in his own favor, but most of the time Sancho believes in giants, rival knights, and even the fact that his service eventually would make him a governor of his own island. During the third adventure especially, when the Duke and the Duchess play pranks on Don Quixote, they also involve Sancho, making him believe he flew with magic or became an actual governor. You can absolutely say that during the first adventure Sancho is more skeptical of some of Don Quixote's delusions, especially when he mistakes taverns for castles, but during the third adventure Sancho is almost as much of a believer in knights errants as Don Quixote himself. That actually follows what we see in La Manchaland flashbacks. Sancho was suspicious of Barry and didn't act too impressed with the whole war on the side of the humans thing, but at the same time Sancho was fiercely loyal to Don Quixote, and eventually she got quietly obsessed with the same things as her father. That loyalty comes from the fact that before Sancho became a Bloodfiend, she didn't have anyone, no family at all, and Don Quixote provided her with a sense of belonging. And I suspect he also saw in her, as she was dying there, someone who would support his adventures and endeavors. A kindred spirit, if you will. Pun quite intended. Also, is it just me, or is that scene extremely reminiscent of Helsing and the time when Alucard turned Victoria Saras? Only, with less boobs and more feet fanservice, which seems to be the main fanservice focus we get for this character and this canto specifically. If you are someone who got a kick out of putting shoes back on her bloodied feet, well, you know what? Fair enough, no judgment there. Sorry, I just had to get this off my chest. But returning to the main point, while Sancho is, well, Sancho, she is also the one we know as Don Quixote, even though the name was bestowed upon her by a pair of shoes. But what if we take the original novel and try to apply it to her? Surprisingly, it kinda lines up. For a while after joining the bus, she ran around wildly, completely delusional about herself and her role, getting herself and us in all sorts of trouble and getting her ass kicked for it quite a bit by the illustrious Red Gaze. That was entertaining, but also frustrating, and steps were made to teach her at least some restraint. Still, she continued being herself without a care in the world, and often without noticing the world around. Bloodfiends of La Manchaland clearly recognized her, but she only saw them as monsters, ignoring their words and their stories, even though their stories were very much real and relevant to her past, much more than the vague fantasies she, in her unrelenting delusions, made up for herself. But what I really want to make a comparison to is original Don Quixote's third adventure. And you might have noticed that I did not explicitly specify what I consider to be theme and moral for the third story. I did mention that a lot of people found amusement in Don Quixote's actions during his third adventure, and I want to focus on one character specifically. Don Antonio is Don Quixote's host in Barcelona, and at some point in the story he has a conversation with Sanson, who explains to him the full extent of his plan. This happens after Sanson beats Don Quixote as the Knight of the Moon. And here is what Don Antonio says in reply, and I quote, "God forgive you, Signor, for the injury you have done the world, in seeking to restore to his senses the most agreeable madman that ever lived. Do not you perceive, Signor, that the benefit resulting from the cure of Don Quixote will never counterbalance the pleasure produced by his extravagancies? But I imagine all the care and industry of Signor Bachelor will hardly be sufficient to effect the recovery of a man who is so thoroughly mad. And if it was no breach of charity, I would say, may Don Quixote never be cured, for in his recovery we only lose his own diverting flights, but also those of his squire Sancho Panza, and any of these conceits are such as might convert Melancholy herself into merriment and laughter." This is a direct acknowledgement that Don Quixote's madness and delusions can and are bringing joy to people that surround him. Not all people, granted, but enough to warrant a question. Should Don Quixote really be cured? Shouldn't he be allowed to wander and continue his strange and amazing adventures? Yes, they can bring inconvenience and confusion to some, but aren't they at the same time worth it? And I think this question is the most important one asked in the third adventure and even the whole book. Opinions may vary on what the answer should be, but the fact is, while there were enough people that found Don Quixote amusing, none of them could say it directly to his face. Being mad like he was, he would have taken offense at people laughing at his noble and serious convictions. But what if they could? And that is what Limbus does. At our Don Quixote's lowest point, when she is stripped of all pretense and delusions and ready to abandon the dream, it is us, Dante and the rest of the bus crew, who start retelling her story. Maybe not like it actually happened, but more like how she could have described it, proving that while yes, our Don Quixote was absolutely delusional and bothersome and way too loud on more than one occasion, at the same time, what we had together was amazing and worthy adventures. So, while dreaming of a life full of adventures and glory, she already lived that life for real. And there is absolutely no reason to deny it as a lie or delusions. And there is no reason for that story to end. And that in a way validates our Don Quixote's delusions. And in that she comes full circle. Because remember, back in the time when she traveled with her father, they had fun by pretending to be fixers and helping people. I assume bringing at least some joy to those who met them. After losing her memories, she got engrossed by this delusional fixer fantasy and she continued that fantasy with us on the bus. But now, understanding fully her past and her own self, she knowingly returned to pretty much the same, acting in the same loud, weird, and at times even obnoxious way. But this time there's no delusion in that. Or you can also call it delusion by choice. This is what and who she wants to be in honor of Don Quixote of La Manchaland, and also just for herself. And also even for us, because honestly, no matter how much we may complain about her, we cannot help but smile while witnessing her adventures. So yes, there is almost no change in her demeanor, which bothered me at first. But now, after thinking about it, I realize that she did at the same time experience a huge and amazing change to her character. And you know what? I will accept that, and I will consider it to be the answer to the book's question.